Hello, good afternoon, and thank you everybody for joining me here today. My name is Jin An-Dunning. I am a librarian and LIS faculty at College of the Desert. Just was granted tenure, so I can now breathe a sigh of relief. And I am also for the past, I believe, a year and a half, I have been the OER liaison for College of the Desert as well. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I feel OER advocates should know to be successful OER advocates. Now, I feel a little silly. I have a PowerPoint presentation all ready to go. Oh, thank you, Angela. But, at any time, if you have a question, please feel free to interrupt me and ask away. I'm always happy to ask questions. So I'm going to go ahead and share my PowerPoint. And let's talk about this. 5 things OER advocates should know. And again, my name is Jin An-Dunning, pronounced like the alcohol, but I'm the non-alcoholic Jin. So I laugh at my own jokes. It's a personality defect, I think. So today we're going to cover why we are here and what does it mean to be an OER advocate. 2, what is the problem with traditional textbooks? 3, how does the high cost of textbooks affect students? 4, what is OER? And 5, how can I convince people to adopt more open materials? So let's talk about this. Why are we here? I'm going to start off with a little story about me that honestly is a little hard for me to share, and it's not something that I shared a lot. It's something that I only recently began to share, and it's this. Back when I was in college, I had a group of my friends come to me to hold an intervention. They told me that they noticed that they could not remember the last time they'd seen me eating something, and when they did, they noticed I ate the same thing, like plain spaghetti noodles. And they really thought that I had an eating disorder. What they didn't know was that I wasn't eating because I had an eating disorder, but because I simply couldn't afford food. A confluence of events happened in my life while I was in college that depleted my savings. I could not get help from my parents because, well, that's another story. And I was literally starving to death because I had to make a choice between buying what textbooks and classroom materials I could and food. And I made the choice of buying what materials or what textbook materials and other course materials I could with the little money I had. I'm not telling you this because I want you to feel sorry for me. I'm doing great right now. This was years ago. I'm an old lady now. This was many years ago. But I'm telling you this story because a lot of times, and I'm about to throw some statistics out at you. Oh, my apologies, my dog is barking. And I'm about to throw some stats out at you. A lot of time we hear all these numbers and we've become, I think, a little bit of stat wary, I guess, because we hear so many numbers all the time. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Are you okay? Sorry, my dog. It's hard for us to really listen to these numbers and take them, but behind every number that we talk about today, the things we go through, the things our students go through, there's a person behind that. And a lot of us, and I mean a lot of us, because if you asked my friends, they would have said at that time that they really didn't know anybody who was going through that. A lot of us know somebody who is starving, who is hungry, who's food insecure, who's housing insecure, who for a variety of reasons are going through things right now, and it affects all of us, not just them, but all of us. And these are real people with real stories. So that's something that I ask people to remember when we're looking at these facts and figures, because they mean something. They are about people, and that's who we are here to help. And the second part of this is that a lot of times And I say this because usually when you do these presentations, people remember the first part of a presentation and the last part. And one thing I would like you to remember is that when you're an OER advocate, there are times when you will want to give up. There is such a thing as sympathy fatigue, right? There's such a thing as, and we are right now undergoing one of the greatest crises in probably, and hopefully, and I say hopefully because I don't think any of us want to go through something like this again, our lifetimes, right? So, and it's easy to be fatigued or to give up. And so I ask people, when you're feeling that way, to remember why you're here and why you're doing this, and think about what you get out of advocating for open education resources, which really to me means advocating for our students, advocating for those who do not have a voice or are too ashamed to speak. So that being said, what is this problem? What is this problem that draws us to open and low cost resources? Well, the problem is that traditional textbooks are just simply unaffordable for many students. The college textbooks increase at approximately 3 times the rate of inflation. That's 88% from 2006 to 2016 alone. And by the way, I got this from the Bureau of Consumer Index from the U.S. Census website. And I want you to notice something. The cost of textbooks, the inflation of the cost of textbooks outpaced not only just inflation, but college tuition, and in some cases, medical costs. The cost of textbooks became exorbitant over the years, and 88%. It's, and I don't use this word lightly. It to me is bonkers. To use to use a colloquial slang from my youth, and so textbooks are more expensive. Probably everybody in this room already knew that, but how does that affect our students? Is it affecting our students? Yes, and but by the way, I could have quoted from dozens of studies, and this one I chose because this one was about California community college students. So a couple of years, the Institute for College Access and Success did a statewide survey of California community college students about various things, one of them being textbook costs. And in that survey that was conducted 2 years ago, they found that 1 out of 4 California community college students have dropped out of 1 or more classes due to textbook costs. Again, more than 25% of our students are dropping out because they simply cannot afford the textbook. And in that study, which I found interesting, were a bunch of quotes from California community college students. And 2 that really honestly spoke to me was one where a student said, "I just bought a math book, which means I won't be able to buy groceries for 2 weeks." Another said, "I have taken this semester off because I can't afford books and supplies." And by the way, these students are not unique. They are not unique. This is happening to a lot of students. In fact, there was a movement a couple of years ago called Textbook Broke, where students were sharing some of their stories on Twitter, on Instagram, and a lot of them said the same thing. Many of them were going broke or going without so that they could even try to afford the textbook that they were assigned for a class. Not only that, though, multiple studies have found that this disproportionately hurts students of color. In fact, in one study found that 41% of Hispanic students have decided not to take a course due to the cost of the textbooks. And, and like these figures to me, and honestly, I could have spent an entire session just talking about these numbers, but we don't have that kind of time, right? In fact, my time is limited to an hour, so let's go on ahead. What is OER? And this is something that I found that there's a lot of misunderstandings about, or something that even beginning OER advocates may not be 100% certain of. So at the base, what I would call the traditional definition of OERs are flexibly licensed educational materials that can be used and reused in a variety of ways. And that can mean things, and so for a lot of people, that means textbooks. Oh, textbooks, because that's where a lot of the movement is, right? But open educational resources can be course modules, videos, books, not just textbooks. It can be test banks. It can be images. It can be resources that you find through the library, because open right now for me means flexibility. So there is actually a new narrative framework that's happening around OER, where we're going outside of the idea that it's just about free, but or just about openly licensed things, but things that we can flexibly license through various venues to offer for free or very low cost to our students. So that being said, so it looks like I have a question in the chat. My apologies, I'm having an issue opening up my chat box. It's not opening while I'm sharing the screen. If there is a question, could somebody, could you please read it out to me? Okay, I guess there wasn't a question, it might have been a comment. So then we get to the heart of the matter, which is, how can I convince people to adopt more open resources? How do I convince people to make this change? First, what I tell new advocates, whether or not you're somebody who's advocating for yourself inside just your classroom with your students, preparing to adopt an new OER, whether or not you're a new OER liaison for your institution, an OER coordinator, OER librarian, a DE person, a faculty member who just wants to advocate for OER use in your department. There are many ways that people can advocate for OER. One of them are, the first one I say is be prepared. So, because, just like everything else, when we're people listen when you know your stuff. And being prepared doesn't mean that you have to go to every conference and learn every little tiny piece of what open education resources are, which, and there's a lot of piece. In fact, there's something called in librarianship and other in laws called scholarly communications that really delves deep into this as almost like a discipline, where we talk about the different facets of what open educational and what these resources mean. And this can be everything from copyright to publication platforms to more. I'm not saying that you have to spend 1,000 hours learning it, but learn the basics. Read, and another important part is learn who the stakeholders in your school are who may have experienced or know more than you might about this topic. And that could be somebody, somebody who is a librarian, your OER liaison, your DE coordinator, a faculty member who has a lot of experience adapting OERs. Learn who these people are, so that if there is a question that you can't answer, that you are prepared to be able to send that person to somebody who does know more, a little bit more about it than you do. Because one thing that I learned, and I've been doing this, so even before I came to College of the Desert, I worked for an institution, Tidewater Community College, where there was a mandate for OER. And even before that, my first job, and I've worked at various institutions through the years, but I became interested in this because I used to work as a regulatory specialist, doing for a consultancy who dealt a lot with intellectual property or issues of intellectual property. So for me, it was a natural interest. But really at the heart, be prepared, because what happens when you don't know the answer? A lot of times faculty, especially instructional faculty, have a lot on their plate. And so if you can't make it easy for them, or if it's too much of a struggle, even if they're passionate, even though their hearts are in the right place, they may have to walk away for their own sanity because they have just too much going on. So when you get that opportunity to advocate, because sometimes it's a blink of an eye, be prepared. So for example, I have several facts that I have prepared when people have questions. Like when people say, How does OER help me in my institution? Well, multiple studies have found that the classes that use OER textbooks have better retention rates, similar prep times for faculty, increased engagement, and similar or improved test scores and grades. And because I've learned over the years that being ready with some kind of elevator speech or being prepared to answer these questions can help change a mind in the blink of an eye. Next, listen. So obviously, a lot of and it's weird, and this is a mistake I made when I first started advocating for OER, was that I would talk a lot. I would go to department meetings and I would talk to people. I would give presentations. And one day I realized that maybe the problem was that and I was getting some engagement, but not as much as I'd like. So I thought, wait a second, what am I doing wrong? And I realized what I was doing wrong was that I was talking, but I wasn't listening. I wasn't really having a conversation with these faculty, especially with these faculty who I knew to be resistant to OER. So I went out to them and I talked to them. We had a conversation and I listened to what they were saying. So I listened when they told me the reasons why they weren't adopting. And there were a lot of them. And by the way, this differs from institution to institution, because sometimes it might be a person who's stopping them. Sometimes it might be a person who that faculty member, because remember, a lot of our instructional faculty especially are adjuncts, right? So they may fear that they're not allowed to do this. That's actually something that a lot of adjuncts, they didn't know, that they thought that they weren't allowed to adopt or try out a textbook. Sometimes there is a person in their department who they think is a roadblock. Other times it's because they don't have enough time. They don't want to go through curriculum. They've always used traditional textbooks and they're afraid to change. So when you listen to these problems, and until you know what these roadblocks are that might be specific to maybe faculty in general, but also to that person, that department, to your institution, you can't offer solutions. You can't be an advocate until you gain an understanding of what these issues are. And once you know what those issues are, you have to be prepared to try to take a different road. So what do I mean when I say try to take a different road? So these are some of the things that I've done. I'm just going to talk about the things in the last 2 years that I've done as OER liaison. One of the things I did was I joined as many committees would take me. It's why my blood pressure is so high today. But you know what? It worked, because I joined Guided Pathways, and because we didn't have a committee, convinced our committee chairs to start an OER subcommittee, which I co-chaired. And out of that OER subcommittee, I wrote and got funding to try an OER initiative, where we successfully signed up more than about 60 faculty. We had to put a cap at 60, who could then go in and go in classes. Not only that, but I offered them support. I talked to them about intellectual copyright. I helped them find books. I even, if they needed it, I even split up the PDF, Adobe PDFs that they found into chapters for them. Everything that I could to make their lives easier, to facilitate, I did. And I not only did that, but I trained my colleagues on how to do these things, not just librarians, but library specialists, for some of whom had never had to go inside, who knew a lot about like books and repositories, but had never had to go inside Canvas before, or had to deal with the different types of technologies they might have to use in order to support faculty who are adopting OER. Another thing I did was I discovered, when faculty told me that they didn't want to adopt OER because they were afraid of it, I went to administration and asked, because they'd never been stepped outside of those traditionally published textbooks. And because of those ancillary materials, I not only made a point of trying to learn about what initiatives had those offered those ancillary materials, but also went to our VP and not once but many times. Persistence is my middle name, and got our got administration to agree to try out ProQuest eBook Central, which gave us access to 200,000 books, some of which could be used for classes, and which also contains some textbooks, which I then convinced faculty to adopt. Those faculty who were too afraid to adopt OER to adopt, because those would be free with unlimited user licenses for the students. And not only textbooks, but I got some of our English faculty to, instead of having students buy books, go into our ProQuest eBook Central database to select books out of those that would be free for our students to access. And though this is really new and we just really got it, our preliminary numbers are very promising. I found out yesterday that there were faculty who I didn't know were adopting books from ProQuest eBook Central and other EBSCO ebooks that we had purchased, that were sending their students to us and had incorporated it into their syllabi. Another thing I did was one of the things that I heard, which was rich me, but I heard this from a couple of more than 2 faculty, that that they didn't want to do it because they didn't want to go through the curriculum process of having to change the textbook if they liked it. So then I went to curriculum, and right now I'm working on I met with our curriculum chair, and we're partnering together now to do a one-time easy change of OER of textbooks within the core without having to do anything else, as long as it's just an OER textbook, and that's something that's going through the approval process right now. So anytime a faculty member has Oh, another thing too, there's a lot of misconceptions among especially our adjunct faculty about what they are and aren't allowed to do within their departments. That's perfectly understandable. So what I did was I went to their department chair, their dean. I got it in writing. What are you guys comfortable allowing your adjuncts to do? What can I tell adjuncts so that I don't tell them, our adjunct faculty, so I don't tell them the wrong thing, that we don't give the wrong message, so that we can be consistent. And I went and I talked to them, got it in writing so that I could then inform our adjuncts who might have been too intimidated to talk to their department chair or didn't want to make a fuss about what they could and could not do from a curricular standpoint, any transfer concerns they had. And a lot of times it's just talking and listening and trying these different roads to try to remove these impediments that are going. And a lot of times, sometimes some things won't work, right? And again, this will differ from institution to institution, but it means not just getting buy-in from faculty, but like I said, trying to get buy-in from administration. You know, it was weird. I'm right now as a part of an equity. I'm taking part in my college's Equity Institute, and one of the things somebody told me, one thing that really struck to me was that if you want to really know what a college is about, don't read their mission statement. Look at their budget, right? And that's where and because colleges put their money to what matters to them. OER, open educational resources, these type of flexible resources, it isn't just about providing free things to students. It is about these things have outcomes, measurable outcomes in student retention, student success, and student and more, right? Like I said, 40%. More than 40% of Hispanic students who were surveyed in one survey said that they didn't take a class because of the cost of the textbook. And if we think about it, what classes are much more likely to have expensive textbooks? Science, technology, engineering, math, right? So the cost of textbooks sometimes are providing a barrier to students in enrolling for classes where they can get these skills to get to pursue higher paying jobs if that is what they want. So a lot of times at the end, being an OER advocate, to me, and I'm going to say this, is about the passion. I know it's hard. And by the way, everybody who's here, I so appreciate it, because if I can convince one more person to try out an OER or talk to somebody at your institution, or even maybe talk to others in your department about your experiences about OER, then this will have been worth it to me. And I am so, so grateful that I've been given this opportunity to talk to you today about OER. So I wanted to try to keep this, I didn't want to keep you here forever, but I'm going to stop sharing now. Do I have any questions right now about anything that I covered, or anything that you think that I mentioned that you might be interested in? Okay. I really appreciate learning about OER through the lens of your story. Really powerful. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you so much for saying that. I really appreciate it. I will say that it's weird because people people don't think this about me, but in many ways I'm a stereotypical librarian in that I'm very much of an introvert. And one of the things that I realized I had to do, not only just to advocate for myself, but for our students, for my department, for my school, is that I can't be shy. And that's part of that is sharing something of yourself with the people I speak with, with the people I'm having this conversation with. So I really appreciate that feedback. Thank you so much. Oh, right. So do I have any more questions or comments? All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much. I know that there is another session, and I know you're most likely going to another session or about to enjoy a beautiful Friday. So thank you so much for coming today.